Hello everyone. Today we'll be looking at the analysis of slot 2 of CAT 2022. We'll start off with a broad overview of the exam and then we'll go into a detailed analysis of each of the three sections in the exam. Now, at first glance, it appears that there is no change in the pattern because there are like 24 questions in VRC, 20 questions in DILR and 22 questions in Quant, and this was the same as CAT 2021. But going into the details, we will see that there are quite a few changes. In VRC, the RC part was similar to last year with 4 passages, each passage having 4 questions. In verbal ability, there was a new type of question, sentence placement, which was introduced this year. In this question, one sentence was given and another paragraph with 4 blanks was given. Now, the challenge is to identify in which of these 4 blanks will the sentence fit in. So, this has come in the place of the odd one out questions that were there for the last so many years in CAT. Now, the number of non-MCQs have also reduced in VRC with only 3 non-MCQs, which are called the para-formation questions. The sentence placement and ParaSummary both were completely MCQs. In DILR, again, a big surprise is instead of having 6 question sets and 4 question sets, now there are 5 question sets across. So there were 4 sets with 5 questions each. So the number of questions in the section still was 20, but again, the composition of the sets has changed this year. Now this presents one significant challenge. Earlier, when there were 6 question sets and 4 question sets, the students can sort of understand that the 4 question sets were probably a little doable as compared to the 6 question sets. But now, with all the sets having 5 questions each, it becomes a challenge to identify which set to start with. In QA, the total number of questions remained at 22, as was the case last year. And in terms of the areas, arithmetic and algebra had 17 questions in total, while geometry, modern maths and numbers together had only 5 questions. Now we will go into the detailed analysis. In VRC, there were 4 passages, as I mentioned earlier, and of these 4 passages, most of the passages were difficult to read because they were very dense to understand, and the ideas presented were also a little complex. The one on social institutions was difficult to read, and the questions were also difficult to answer. Whereas the one on music was extremely difficult to comprehend. It had a lot of complex ideas that were presented, and it was very difficult to get the hang of the central theme of the passage. The one on engineering pedagogy was slightly easier to read. I would say it's a moderate difficulty level in terms of readability. But because the questions again were a little twisted, the difficulty level would be somewhere between moderate and difficult. The passage on octopus was the easiest of all. It was a very easy passage to read, and the questions were also moderate and not very difficult to answer. Now, one of the main challenges in this section is that the questions were a little twisted. So some of the questions were, which of the following, if false, would undermine the author's conclusion. Now, to arrive at what is actually being asked, that itself is like solving a little reasoning puzzle. Because it was so twisted and we have to understand what is being asked, and only then one can solve the question accurately. Now, there were questions like this spread across all the 4 passages, but because the octopus passage was easy to read, even such questions were slightly easier to attempt. But in the case of some of the more difficult passages, such questions were extremely challenging, and they were almost impossible to solve without spending enough time. Now, the verbal ability part had 3 para-formation questions and 2 sentence placement questions and 3 para-summaries. Now, the para-formation questions were a little difficult because there were not many connectors given, and one had to read the sentence, understand them, and try to fit them in a context before you can actually answer the question. The sentence placement questions, even though it's a new question type, it's actually slightly easier to solve. The difficulty level is around moderate, and any student who feels that it's a new type of question and therefore it must be difficult would have missed out on scoring easy marks. The ParaSummary questions, actually 2 were doable and 1 was slightly tough. Overall difficulty was around moderate to difficult. Now to score 85 percentile in VRC, around 21 marks, that is a range of 20 to 22 marks will fetch you 85 percentile. Around 28 to 30 marks will fetch 95 percentile, while 37 to 39 marks will fetch around 99 percentile. Coming to the DILR section, there were 4 sets and each set had 5 questions. But all the sets were slightly on the tougher side, except for one, which was the one on scatter chart. The scatter chart set, it dealt with revenues and costs of 4 companies. And because it was a little lengthy, it had some text and then 2 scatter charts. It was not very inviting. Once you get down to solving the set, you realize that it's very easy to solve. But because of the length and the number of charts and the data given, students may have felt it's a little challenging, but that is not so. The set on households and salesmen, it's a reasoning set. It's a quant-based reasoning. This set also had a lot of text to sift through, and it almost, while reading the text, it almost feels like it's a very difficult set to solve, but that was not the case. Once you get down to the actual logic of the set, it's not that difficult. So this set is around a moderate to difficult level. And the product types set is basically a mix of Venn diagrams and distribution set. This was a tough set, primarily because there were a lot of variables and you will end up with having a lot of equations and you have to solve for each of the equations, and it is very easy to commit mistakes when solving such a set. That is the primary reason why this is difficult, but if one is very diligent in noting down the information and one is very careful in solving the equations, this may not have posed too much of a challenge, but again, it would have taken up a lot of time to solve. Now, the set on warehouses is the most difficult set in this section because it had a scenario which needs a very long time to process, and to actually solve the questions you need to get down into the logic, which again was not very direct. So there were like multiple challenges involved in solving the set. The first is to understand what is being described, and the next part is to understand what is being asked, and the next part is to figure out the logic, and all of these things makes this set a very difficult one. Now, given the length of all the sets in this section, it is almost as if each of this set in this section is a mini RC passage. It had so much of description. For example, the household salesman one or the warehouses one, they all had so much of description, and to understand all of that, it would have been mentally draining. And that is one of the major challenges in this section. Now, to score 85 percentile, one has to score around 14 to 16 marks. That's around 7 attempts with a fairly good accuracy. And to score 95 percentile, one needs to score around 21 to 23 marks. That's around 9 attempts with a pretty good accuracy. And to score around 99 percentile, one needs to score around 28 to 30 marks, and that's around 12 attempts with fairly good accuracy. Now, if you look at the 95 percentile, that is around 21 to 23 marks. So any student who has solved 2 sets confidently, he can expect to score around 95 percentile in this section. Now, as we have seen, the VRC part had a lot of challenging RC passages, and the DILR part had a lot of challenging sets to solve, and that would have taken a toll on solving the quant section. The reason for that is going through all those tough RC passages and going through all those tough DI sets, many students may have felt mentally drained, and that was one mistake that most students should not have done, but again, it's easier said than done. Because of all that tough passages and tough sets, coming to the QA part and maintaining that level of focus would have been really challenging. But again, that is what you would have practiced for in most of the AIMCATs that you have attempted. In the QA section, there were a number of questions across different topics, and there wasn't any one topic in which there were a lot of questions. Now, the advantage with that is even if you are not very comfortable with a certain topic in quant, you will not miss out on a great number of questions, because every topic had only like 1 or 2 questions, except for averages, mixtures, and allegations, which had 4 questions. Even that was slightly on the tougher side. Now, some of these questions in this section, they appear difficult, but once you get down into solving it, it was a little doable. But again, there were other questions which appeared difficult and they were actually difficult. Now, the challenge is to differentiate between these two kinds of questions, the ones which appear difficult and are not difficult, and the ones that appear difficult and are actually difficult. Now, again, it's not an easy challenge to overcome, and anyone who is able to identify those kind of questions would have scored well in this section. Now, the total number of questions in this are 22, as we have discussed, and there are 8 non-MCQ questions. And there were a few questions even from permutations and combinations and trigonometry. But the good news is that there was only one question each from these topics, which are normally a little tougher for, for most of the students. But otherwise, there were a good mix of questions from all the topics in this section. Now, for 85 percentile, one needs to score around 12 to 14 marks. That's around 6 attempts with good accuracy. And for 95 percentile, one needs to score around 20 to 22 marks. That's around 9 attempts with a fairly good accuracy. And to score around 99 percentile, one needs to score 13 to 32 marks. That's around 13 attempts with good accuracy. Coming to the overall cutoffs, in the afternoon slot, a score of 63 will come to around 95 percentile, while a score of 73 will come to around 97.5 percentile, while a score of 84 will come to around 99 percentile. This is basically what it implies is that it is a tougher paper than CAT last year, and also that the difference in marks is quite low. Basically, there are 63 and 73 is only 10 marks difference, and 73 and 84 is only 11 marks difference. So if you just answer 4 questions correctly, you will jump from 95 to 97.5. Another 4 questions, you will jump from 97.5 to 99. Now, 4 questions may not seem like much for the students who have not taken CAT this year, because for the students who have taken CAT this year, 4 questions is a very big ask. That is evident because the paper is that challenging. Thank you.